Welcome to Bonnie's Beat. I'm your host, Bonnie Squires. We're coming to you from Radnor Studio 21 in beautiful downtown Wayne. And as you can see, the new name of our broadcast, whatever it is Mainline Television. It used to be Lower Merion Narberth and Radnor something. Now it's Mainline Television. They even have mugs to match. Okay. I like to showcase people who are doing important things in the community, whether it's academia, charity, nonprofit organizations, special events. And today we have someone who lives on the main line and happens to be the executive director of HIAS Pennsylvania. We'll explain what HIAS Pennsylvania means. Her name is Cathryn Miller Wilson, and her Cathryn is spelled C-A-T-H-R-Y-N. Right, Cathryn?
Yes.
Okay.
That's
and
correct.
Truth in Advertising, I'm on the board. And it's such an important agency that's been around for over 100 years, right?
Yes, close to 130, so more than 134, I think.
Ooh.
1882.
Well,
So-
and the reason I called Cathryn was because maybe you've seen what's been going on, rallying for immigrants' rights. Can you get a little closer, Julia, do you think? I don't know if she can do that from the control room. Anyway, gigantic headlines everywhere. Can we get this a little closer? Can't do it. Okay, don't worry about it. You'll trust me. Rallying for immigrants' rights. The headline must be 40-point, which is pretty big. And these spontaneous rallies, don't believe it when somebody says on television that all these people that come out holding signs are being paid by somebody. That's nonsense. There are people who are petrified that are coming out and saying, okay,
Absolutely.
now tell us what HIAS Pennsylvania stands for, HIAS.
HIAS stands for Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. We've been around since 1882, 134 years. We were founded by Jews to help rescue Jews from pogroms, terrorist attacks
In
on
Russia.
Jews in Russia. And we have expanded in a lot of different ways. We now have a very complex set of programs, 4 to be exact: refugee resettlement, immigration legal services, citizenship assistance, and asylee outreach.
Okay. What's the difference between a refugee and an immigrant and asylum?
And an asylum seeker. So I'm glad you asked, because a lot of people confuse those terms. A refugee is somebody who is fleeing from their country of origin because of persecution, who winds up in another country, generally speaking, at a refugee camp. At those camps, after a series of interviews, it's determined that the person can no longer return to their country of origin and
Well, they
needs
could
to
return,
resettle.
but their head would be chopped off, right?
Right, exactly.
So if you have a
Exactly.
choice,
right,
you're not
right.
going back.
That's right. So, so they need to resettle in a third country. Once it's established that they have to resettle, they go through a series of background checks to see if they meet the definition of refugee, whether they have a legitimate fear of persecution based on either gender or ethnicity or religion, and then once they've been through that process, whether they meet the security checks for the country that they're going to resettle in, and after many years, once they've passed the security and the health clearances, then they can actually resettle. That's a refugee. An asylum seeker,
Many years.
many years.
I mean, we've seen people on television who, when they were first turned away because of this illegal executive order, which 2 sets of judges have already dismissed. We'll see what happens next time. But the people had waited 13 years to get permission to come to the United States. And they're greeted by somebody who says you're not allowed in, and you have to pay to have to buy another ticket to go back. It's just so overwhelming.
It is, and outrageous. But one point of clarification, a lot of the people that were detained in the airports were not, in fact, refugees. They were permanent residents. They were what's known as Iraqi SIVs, who are people given special status because they have helped the American government. And the process of
They were
clearing,
translators. They worked with and
yes.
for the American military in Iraq. And that's what we do to them. We turn them away at the airport. It's just so shocking.
Right.
Go ahead.
It's horrible. And make no mistake, it's re-traumatizing. I mean, you have to understand that the 109 people that were detained the weekend that we're talking about, the weekend of January 27th, those were people that had all, at one point or another, experienced trauma or persecution. Either they were refugees, or they were Iraqi SIVs, or they were long-term permanent residents who had moved here because of troubles, because they needed to resettle here for one reason or another. And they had what they were led to understand was legal status. They arrived off the plane and were detained without access to an attorney, without access to family members.
And the family members were waiting elsewhere in the airport and weren't even allowed to say hello to them.
Yes, that's correct. So anyway, back to the definitions. An asylum seeker is someone who is the equivalent of a refugee, someone who has flown their country of origin because of persecution based on ethnicity or religious status, some sort of minority protected status.
Or political activity.
Right, or political activity, or even environmental disaster in some cases. But instead of ending up in another country, they end up in this country, and they file paperwork claiming that they are the same status as a refugee. And if they are successful in their claim, then they're given asylum status. So they are legally equivalent to a refugee once they are granted asylum. But prior to them obtaining asylum, they're in a kind of limbo, a legal limbo.
No man's land.
Right, exactly. And then an immigrant is simply exactly what the term says. Somebody who has immigrated from another country. They may have a variety of reasons why they have come over.
Often they have a family member who's already here.
That's correct.
Or they have a sponsor.
Correct.
Who's here.
Or they could also be someone who, in fact, has an asylum claim, or in fact has, it might be a child who has something called special immigrant juvenile status claim. That's a claim if they can show that they've been abused and abandoned or neglected in their country of origin, and then it would not be in their best interest to be sent back. So that is something that they may have.
What about the kid that was on his way for heart surgery and was turned away? He was like 6 years old.
Yeah, so now that's someone, I don't know the details of that story, but what I assume is that his parents were able to obtain a travel visa for him and them so that he could come and have the surgery. But because he was from one of the named countries,
one of those 7 countries,
right, they turned him away, even though he had legal documentation. That, Bonnie, that's the crux of why we were successful in the habeas petitions that were filed, because once you have a certain legal status, you're entitled to due process. And that was not due process. Simply pulling the rug out from under them, saying that, yes, we gave you legal status yesterday, but today we changed our mind, is not something that's acceptable in under American law. Not without process, without an opportunity to be heard.
Now, there are several divisions of HIAS Pennsylvania. And how big a staff do you have?
So HIAS Pennsylvania has currently 34 staff members. 3 are part-time, 3 or 4 are part-time. I lose track. And a few are fellows, which means that they are funded for 1 year or 2 years, and then it's expected that they would move on unless we find funding to keep them. So, but all of our staff is extraordinarily diverse. Amongst the 34, there are 18 languages. We have...
Tell us some of the languages that your staff can speak.
Sure. So French, Spanish, Russian, Burmese, Arabic, Hungarian, Hebrew,
Chinese.
I don't believe we have a Chinese speaker currently on staff. We've had some in the past.
What about other Asian languages?
So we are in desperate need of having more Asian languages on staff.
Okay.
Other than Burmese and Bhutanese, we don't have Chinese or Vietnamese or Korean, which is something that we need. We do. I'm trying to think. We also have Italian. We also have. I said Hebrew, right?
Yes. How many attorneys are on your staff?
So counting me, we have 12, but you probably shouldn't count me because I don't have a caseload.
Okay. How many cases does each one of your attorneys on staff carry at any one time?
Way too many. I would say between 40 and 55, which is really much too high a caseload. We see more than 3,000 people a year, and that counts the refugees. We provide consultations to many thousand people, including more than 700 kids. So, yeah.
Now, we were reading about all these people that were put into like a detention center in York, Pennsylvania, some places in central Pennsylvania, Berks County, in inhuman conditions. Why were they placed there? Why would the American government do that? And who were these people?
So for the most part, they're women and children, and they're people seeking asylum, and they get detained because, remember I said in the beginning, they're in a legal limbo, so they don't have status. So as a result of not having status, they get put in detention until their asylum claims can be litigated. There are many problems with that. I mean, one, the facility itself is not really licensed to care for women and children. And
the conditions suck.
Yeah, and so the conditions are not appropriate. Two, the asylum system itself is very, very backlogged. So the initial intention was a real temporary facility until the claims could be litigated and folks would either be granted asylum and could then be integrated or denied and then deported. However, because there is such an asylum backlog, women and children have been staying there for many, many months, sometimes more than a year, just waiting to have their claims heard.
Do the kids get to go to school, or how could they go to school if they're in a detention center?
Yeah, I mean, there's a serious problem. There is supposedly some tutoring that's happening, but there are allegations that it's not sufficient. So,
and when the President of the United States threatens to cut off funding for services, what does that do to HIAS Pennsylvania and your 13 attorneys?
Well, it's a serious problem. 70% of HIAS Pennsylvania's funding is federal.
70%.
70%.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
70%. Wow.
Yeah. So we are extraordinarily concerned. We're concerned about our staff, and we're concerned about our clients. So one of the things we're struggling with now immediately is, as a result of President Trump's order that the number of refugees that will be accepted for this fiscal year is 50,000. That's less than half the number of refugees that President Obama said we were going to resettle this fiscal year, and we get paid per capita that we resettle. So we are staffed to resettle 250. We will be lucky if we resettle 150. So currently we've resettled 100, and the number of refugees that have come in have slowed down substantially despite the litigation that continues regarding the executive orders.
Well, there are so many devoted volunteers that contribute time, money, energy, and a lot of goods to help a refugee set up an apartment. I mean, people come over, they have nothing. They have the clothes on their back. And we lost one of our most devoted volunteers, Risa Rudney, who lived along the main line and for years had her synagogue and everybody she knew and everybody she was related to collecting furniture, clothing, pots and pans, everything that somebody would need to set up an apartment. And HIAS finds apartments for these people. Explain a little bit about that program.
Sure. So I can tell you before the executive orders, and then I can tell you afterwards. So our normal process, when a refugee gets assigned to be resettled by our agency, we receive an email from HIAS Inc., which is a national organization. We're affiliated with them, but independent. So HIAS
Inc. is in New York, right?
That's correct. So HIAS Inc. sends us an email and says, okay, the following person and his or her children and spouse are coming on this date, and they're coming from this country, and these are the ages. Very little information is shared with us. We generally get that email about 10 days before they arrive. We have a housing specialist. The housing specialist has 10 days to find the apartment, clean the apartment, furnish the apartment, and get it all ready for the welcome. So, so we definitely utilize our volunteers. We have a rapid response housing setup volunteer position. You can sign up, and as soon as our housing specialist is ready to set up an apartment, she sends an email, and the first 3 responders get to help set up the apartment. And so, and we're very grateful.
Where do you find these apartments?
All over Philadelphia, but we try very hard to resettle people in community. So, for example, there is a Syrian community that is in the Northeast. And so,
interesting.
Yeah, and so when we received notice about Syrians resettling, we generally tried to find somewhere in the Northeast. There's a Congolese community in West Philadelphia, and so we try to resettle there. There's a Burmese community in South Philadelphia, so we try to settle those folks there. We recently have gotten an influx of Ugandans, and that's a new community. So we've been looking for spots that would be good for them.
Let's put all the information on the screen if people want to call and volunteer or make a donation. HIASPA.org, 215-832-0900, and HIASPA.org. That's not your direct line, though, Cathryn Miller.
No, that's our
front.
That's our front desk. Yeah.
Okay. Now, also, I do want to mention, because someone who was very important to HIASPA, who was a wonderful philanthropist, was Albie Boskov, the owner of Boskov. Mm-hmm. I remember how thrilled my mother was a few years ago when not only did we have Albie Boskov cater the big reception, the fundraising reception we had, but he came in person and was honored. Mm-hmm. My mother was so excited to meet Albie Boskov. Oh my goodness. So he lived a good life, but he was 87.
Yeah.
Today there are people starting new careers, new careers at 87. So I just wanted to say, and I was very happy to see there was so much national publicity as well as Pennsylvania publicity, because he never left his Reading, Pennsylvania roots. He always talked about that. He loved Reading, and he ended up with, I don't know how many dozens of Boskov stores across the country.
Right.
But I think his son is running the company now, so good things will continue to happen. I don't know if good things are going to continue to happen for refugees and asylum seekers. However, even though that, the latest judicial decision was that order that was released on a Friday afternoon.
On Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Yes.
No less.
Yes, absolutely. And that's another thing, failing to mention the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust.
Including those that the United States turned away.
Yes, right.
And, I think arguably caused their deaths by not taking them in, and now we're doing it again. We're turning people away who need help, and in many cases turning them to their deaths.
I've been doing a lot of reading, and I know what the government claims, that only about 150 people were, quote, inconvenienced, unquote. I wouldn't call it an inconvenience to be terrified, held for 20 hours in an airport There was a woman in her 80s. In the 20 hours she was held, I read they gave her 1 8-ounce glass of water, no food. 20 hours she was locked in at Kennedy. I mean, it's so shocking. It's like 1984 is coming true. That, that awful predictive novel. It's a shame.
Absolutely. I think that it can't be underestimated the effects of terror and intimidation that it does to detain people. Mm-hmm.
The government claimed like 120 people were, quote, inconvenienced, unquote. I'd like to see one of them go for a full day without a bed, without a shower, without food, without anything to drink. But then I read in other reliable sources that something like 60,000 people were not able to get back to the country. And every university president you talk to says, oh my God, I've got professors that can't get back because it happened in between semesters. Mm-hmm. And a lot of students, foreign students, were abroad. A lot of professors were at conferences abroad. They can't get back into the country, even if they're citizens, even if they've got green cards, even if they're permanent residents. So has any of that been remedied?
Yes, so it has thankfully been because of the stay on those portions of the executive order. People have been able to return, but it did cause significant delay and concern. And one of the things that happened is that as a result of the detentions and the turning back, many of the airlines started refusing to allow people to board because they did not want to be responsible for taking people and then having to return them and then being told that the people couldn't afford a return ticket. So they started saying, no, we're not going to let you board. We're not going to let you purchase a ticket. So, so there was really absolute chaos abroad. But that has been straightened out. Most people whose plans were messed up were repaired, and they are now back in the United States, but after significant delay and trauma.
Do you want to give people the date and information about the upcoming HIAS fundraiser?
Yes, so HIAS Pennsylvania is having its annual Golden Door Awards on April 19th at the Marriott at 5:30 p.m.
That's the Marriott in Center City.
Yes, thank you.
On Market Street.
Right. And we are so thrilled that our keynote speaker is going to be Mayor Jim Kenney. So
good for Kenney, who is on my hero list because Kenney said he didn't care that the president has threatened to delete $500,000 from Kenney's budget because Kenney insists Philadelphia will remain a sanctuary city. And the president of my alma mater, Amy Gutman at the University of Pennsylvania, like a lot of other university presidents across the land, say, we will be a sanctuary campus. You want to explain what sanctuary means?
Sure, I'd be happy to. One thing that makes this all very confusing is that sanctuary doesn't have one definition. So there are cities all over the country that call themselves sanctuary, but they, in fact, do things differently than Philadelphia. There's also, by the way, municipalities all across the state of Pennsylvania. Senator Toomey and others have made it seem like it's only Philadelphia that's a sanctuary. In fact, Montgomery County is, as is Delaware County, are several other counties across the state.
And the western end of the state, too.
Yes, exactly. And the reason that there are so many, and there's a very simple reason, you need to understand how this was started. ICE has authority like any other enforcement.
Explain what ICE stands for.
Sorry, Immigration Customs Enforcement.
Immigration Customs Enforcement, something to strike terror in any immigrant's heart.
Right,
okay.
Right, exactly. But they're charged with enforcing the United States' immigration laws. So they have the authority as enforcement officials to detain people that they have probable cause to believe don't have the authority to be here in the United States. They, like any other enforcement official, are supposed to obtain warrants when they have probable cause. What happened was that they got the brilliant idea to ask municipalities to try to assist them so that they wouldn't have to kind of look for people themselves, that when a municipality arrested someone for one reason or another, it didn't really matter, they asked, would the municipality please report that information to ICE, and if the person was in ICE's database, ICE would ask them to please hold on to them, even if it was no longer legal to do so, so that they didn't have to go out and pick them up again. They could come and they could get them, and then they could investigate. The problem became clear in actually a few different federal cases, but the one that I know most about is Galarza versus United States. In that case, a gentleman was arrested by the police. After about an hour and a half of investigation, it was determined that the gentleman, that they had the wrong guy and they wanted to release him, but they were cooperating with ICE, and ICE said, well, could you hold him? So the police said, okay, they held him. It took ICE 3 days to get him, during which time his wife was frantic. He lost his job because he didn't show up because he was detained. And ultimately, it was determined that this gentleman was from Puerto Rico. Not only did they not have probable cause to detain him, he wasn't even an immigrant. So all of that occurred because ICE had created this whole cooperation process that avoided their need to get a warrant. The gentleman sued both Philadelphia and ICE, and the Third Circuit, in deciding whether Philadelphia had any liability, said, well, yeah, you didn't have to cooperate with ICE, and in fact, you shouldn't have. If ICE wasn't following the law and you failed to force them to, then you're complicit in that. So,
Ouch.
Right. And of course, the reasoning makes perfect sense. And so Philadelphia, along with many, many other municipalities, said, whoa, I don't want to be held liable for ICE's failure to do their due diligence. And so that is what they decided, is that we will not detain people when you don't have a warrant, when you don't do your job. And the movement to try to defund those cities for obeying the law is simply exposing the cities to more liability for failing to obey the law. It's a catch-22. It doesn't make any sense, and it's outrageous that Pennsylvania legislators would be behind legislation that would help this.
Anyway, our guest today has been Cathryn Miller-Wilson, who is the Executive Director of HIAS Pennsylvania. And she's got a wealth of information about what's going on these days. So thank you very much. And we'll see everybody next week. Thank you.